And then we crossed a little creek. Had a little bit of trouble doing it. And then after we crossed the creek, I asked her, would you take your shirt off for me for benefits in a scientific experiment? And she said, no. I said, that's fine.
Finally, maybe I was just upset because I'd been said no to too many times, or, and probably because that was a place where she and I were alone together and that type of stuff, and it was just, perfect for that type of stuff, for doing this type of stuff. And then all of a sudden I just exploded and did it.
I felt my knife, I took it out, and I told her to turn around. She did. I told her not to look. She didn't. And then I forced her down and I stabbed her in the neck.
And I think the distinction between fantasy and reality from time to time became quite blurred for Michael.
When he talked to the police right after he was arrested, he made reference to experimenting in the killing.
Yes.
Is that what he was doing?
That's an interesting word for it. He did use that word for me too. Perhaps I can give you a better insight about what he means by that. I found particularly interesting in his description of the homicide that immediately after the homicide, after she was dead, and she appeared quite lifeless, I'm sure. As you know, she was stabbed in the neck. But he immediately expected her, after she was laying on the ground with blood all over her, to jump up and to slap him around for doing this to her. And I think that's a good illustration of how confused his thinking was. I mean, before him is a person who is lifeless. And it's part of his fantasy structure that this is a game, this isn't real. And after she's dead, he halfway expected her to stand up and to slap him around for doing what he'd done.
The whole thing was an experiment I wanted to do because I wanted to see what life was like on the dirty side of it. Because I've been raised in the clean side of life, to be decent. And I just wanted to see what it was like on the other side.
What can the community expect Mike Carroll to be like when he gets out of prison?
Most of the studies they've done suggest we don't have the skills and tools to predict future dangerousness. So I'm going to fall back on just common sense. I would expect that Mike Carroll will still be a very dangerous person in 9 or 10 years.
I don't think they're going to cure him, whether they're going to fix him. I think he will probably continue to be sick, if not get worse. And I think he's a very severe threat to any child. He's very deceptive, and he's obviously very sick. Someone that can do that in a very premeditated, unprovoked manner, I think is a little dangerous.
He will get life, and his matrix will be such that I would expect he'll serve about 9 or 10 years.
But he knows who I am, he knows where I live, and he knows that I have a 2-year-old daughter. And if he gets out in 15 years, then she'll be 17. And there's going to be nothing from stopping him from coming back.
Would you do it again?
I ask myself that question a lot. And so I say to myself, well, if I'm going to do it again, I got to do it so that I don't, leave anything behind. But then I say to myself, now, Mike, if you're going to do this at all, you better not, because I don't want you to. So it's like I'm talking to myself, and I say to myself, don't do this. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Our report on Omar Carroll continues in just a moment as we hear from the family of his victim. Later tonight, an arsonist who has hit the Northwest and other parts of the country, and he may be using something like rocket fuel to feed the fires. Coming up next, Omar Carroll goes before an Oregon parole board tomorrow to seek his release from prison. One of his arguments?
I feel that since rape was part of the fantasy I had, that since I did not, that should at least be a positive towards me.
because you didn't rape her.
Right.
Omar Carroll could walk out on the street in as little as 2 years. His victim's family next on Northwest Reports. In the weeks ahead on Northwest Reports.
It was nearly 29 years ago today that the Beatles came to Portland to play. 20,000 screaming teens and a few scattered parents jammed the Coliseum for 2 shows. They paid as much as $6 for an original ticket, and for the next 30 minutes, they would become a part of history.
The Beatles' one and only visit to the Rose City in the weeks ahead on Northwest Reports. Thanks for watching Northwest Reports, the region's only local primetime news magazine. You can hear Northwest Reports Sunday mornings at 7 on Kissin' Radio 97.1 FM and Sunny 910 AM. Convicted killer Omar Carroll wants out of the Oregon State Prison, despite having spent fewer than 10 years behind bars for the murder of a teenage girl. But Omar Carroll has taken far more than just someone's life. The family of his victim say Omar's fatal fantasy took away their safety and security when he killed Tina Marie Jones.
I tend to feel apologetic toward her. You know, apologetic in that, you know, I feel really bad that I couldn't keep her safe. Though I know that in the long run I couldn't have kept her safe because Omar was so deceptive and all that, and he had already made up his mind. But still, I feel some guilt in that she wanted someone to keep her safe. She hadn't been kept safe all her life. She was here to be safe, and we couldn't keep her safe.
8 years ago, you told me, well, if I am going to do it again, I got to do it so I don't leave anything behind.
Well, I'm not going to do it again. Now, 8 years ago was before treatment. And 8 years ago, I could have very possibly done this crime again. It was, and even now, by psychology, if you've killed once, it's all that much more easier to kill again.
Convicted killer Omar Carroll gets a new hearing every few years, and the mother of his victim gets a new notice.
It's like a surefire, guaranteed way. If you want to ruin my day and make me cry, give me a letter from the parole board. Never fails.
Sue Cunningham goes to each of Omar Carroll's hearings to fight against his release from prison.
I was reading the statement and I was referring to violence and being a sex offender. And boy, that just really spun his rotor. He just, and he started just going on, and I thought, well, this is great. I pushed this guy's button, and so the parole board is seeing how he you know, when he gets past this facade, what he really acts like. So he was really angry about that.
Well, one of the things the family is really concerned about, and it's a justified concern, but it's never going to happen, is that I'm going to go back and get their other daughter. It's been said in the parole board hearings, and I believe it was even said in court. Okay, if that happens, wait a minute, it won't happen.
8 years ago, a judge sentenced Omar Carroll to life in prison with a 25-year minimum term. His original parole date was in the year 2011. Carroll's new parole date, tomorrow morning.
The courts ruled last year that those minimums could not be imposed on remanded juveniles. And as a result, we're going to be going back before the parole board to decide on the release issue.
Multnomah County Deputy District Attorney Norm Frink says the Oregon Attorney General didn't even bother to notify his office when a Salem judge cut Carroll's 25-year minimum sentence to 0 in the fall of 1993. The state also failed to notify Sue and Richard Cunningham.
And then they told me that he'd gone to this judge in Salem and had his minimum sentence basically written off, and I thought, well, good grief.
It was a feeling of shock that this had happened, because I remember back in the sentencing hearing that the judge basically, was very upfront with him. This is it. This is your life. 25-year minimum. And I'm thinking, how could that be changed? So I was a little shocked.
Well, when they release me, I will be able to go out into the community and be a good citizen.
Under Oregon sentencing laws, even if the parole board pulls out all the stops, Carroll will serve at most another 14 years in prison. He turns 26 1 week from tonight, and under his sentencing matrix, the Oregon prison system must let him go before his 41st birthday. However, he could be out in as little as 2 years.
You have to go with what I say, which is I won't do it again, and hope that I'm being honest.
Carroll has already submitted letters to the Oregon Parole Board arguing that it should consider mitigating factors in his case.
The fact that you didn't rape your victim should count in your favor.
I believe so.
Why?
There's a lot of people in prison here that say, well, goodness, you did what you did. You might as well have went ahead and raped her anyway. So, I feel that since rape was part of the fantasy I had, that since I did not, that should at least be a positive towards me.
Because you didn't rape her.
Right. Is it always better to have, it is always better to have just one crime as opposed to two.
Yet during our interview with him, Carroll also told Northwest Reports that his crime was so terrible that no punishment could be adequate.
There would be nothing that they could do to me that would be appropriate to the suffering that I've caused both Tina and her family.
So keeping you here for the rest of your life wouldn't even do it?
Shouldn't.
Should they reduce your sentence?
No, they shouldn't.
Are you going to ask them to reduce your sentence?
I'm going to do the best I can to get...
Are you going to ask them to reduce your sentence on April 27th?
Yes, I will.
In the overly restrictive setting, people just learn to play the game. And they learn how to get along. And it actually may be such a controlling environment that when they're released, they have this surge of wanting to break loose and experience freedom. And I think that can be potentially dangerous.
Dr. Orrin Bolstead has evaluated hundreds of violent juveniles for the courts in Oregon. He first tested Omar Carroll 8 years ago. Bolstead points out that the fact that Carroll has received some sex offender treatment in recent years may mean something.
Based on your knowledge of Oregon's prison system, is it likely that if the system has begun offering, say, sex offender treatment to an inmate, that the system is getting ready to release that person?
That has generally been my experience.
And he insists, well, he won't come back, and he won't do anything to my family, and he won't do anything to anybody, but he certainly won't do it to our family. He won't come anywhere near Portland. His mother lives 4 blocks away. I think, nah, I don't believe it.
In a pre-sentence investigation report, psychologist Dr. David Myers writes about Omar Carroll. It is unlikely that he will ever be safe to return to the community. Even Omar admits that his violent side could emerge again, although he promises not to murder.
There is going to be times when I'm going to be stressed out and all that, and there might be domestic violence. Might. But
You might be.
Yeah, there might be domestic violence if I get stressed out and all that. I've got 2 desires for going back to Portland. One's my family. And the other is to pay respect to Tina.
And how would you do that?
Well, I want to visit her gravesite.
You do?
I do.
Why?
Because feel that I owe it to her.
The Cunningham family points out that when Omar Carroll finally visits his family, he will be back in the same neighborhood where he met and killed Tina Marie Jones, and just a few blocks away from their home.
My main